To start off on a new course of information, Dub Taylor, the Director of the State Energy Conservation Office, is going to fill us in on some of what transpired in the last legislative session relative to energy efficiency renewables. Under his direction, SECO helps the state make the most of domestic energy, reduce state and local government energy costs, and promote cost-effective clean energy technologies. SECO's mission is to maximize energy efficiency while protecting the environment. Prior to joining SECO in 1999, Taylor's public sector experience includes 6 years with the Texas Railroad Commission's Alternative Fuels Research and Education Division. His prior private sector experience was in commercial real estate and property tax consulting. He's a native of Dallas and a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin, which, in spite of that, we're delighted to have him here.
Thanks, Tom. My wife's an Aggie, so we have a mixed marriage. And we're looking for a coach. Anyone out? Looking for a coach. Well, I've got, the follow-up speaker to Governor Ritter, wow, what an unenviable task. And I'm going to spend some time this morning going over a couple of bills, well, packages of bills related to energy efficiency, renewable energy, and water. And some other regulatory bills that did pass. This is the abbreviated presentation because the presentation on what didn't pass but came close would have taken all day. So we're going to talk a little bit about what did happen this past legislative session. Some background for those of you who have not been engaged in the process or have forgotten this since your government classes. The legislature in Texas meets every other year, as Governor Ritter mentioned. Odd number of years for 140 days. And then if there are issues that are still unresolved, the governor can call a special session to deal specifically with those issues on the call. This past session, we had a regular session and we had 3 special sessions. It's not unusual to have a couple of special sessions on the end of a regular legislature. So the composition of the body itself, 181 members, 150 in the House and 31 senators. The election results in 2012, this was pretty interesting. There's been a shift pretty dramatically this past session, and we have a whole lot of new faces, really for the first time. Out of the mix, you can see it's majority Republican in the House, but 41 freshmen. And if you look at the whole body itself, more than half of the House has 2 or fewer sessions of experience. So there's a lot of new faces over the past couple of years. And then the Senate also, 6 new freshmen. So normally what happens is when there's turnover like this, there's an education curve that's pretty steep for new members. And it's everything from finding your office in the Capitol to getting moved in to figuring out where committee rooms are. So it's not unusual that a lot of sort of earth-shaking type new policies don't make it across the finish line when you have a lot of new faces, and that was the case this year. But we'll see what happens next year. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the volume here, and this is pretty typical. What you see is from the 79th on the right to the 83rd legislative session, the number of bills filed. Those are the blue bars. Those passed, the red bar. And if you look at the very bottom, you can see a little bit that's green, and those are the bills that are vetoed. The way that this played out in the 83rd, 6,061 bills and constitutional amendments were filed. Of those, 1,447 passed both chambers, and 26 of those were vetoed. So the balance of those passed and made it into law. And that's a pretty typical volume over the past 4 or 5 years. A lot of legislation. This next chart, if you can see it, I did some circling to help you out. It gives you kind of a graphical representation of where the volume of legislation fell this past session. So in the top left, the most bills filed were House bills. Those are the lighter color in the area of education. Then if you move down underneath that, taxation. The next orange box on that left side is the Senate bills on education. And then if you move to the right, the areas that are circled deal with utilities, environmental issues, water, oil and gas. So this session, if you were to judge where the attention, the focus was based on the bills filed, was education, taxation, and less volume in some of the other areas. And I assume are these slides all going to be posted somewhere afterwards? Okay, all right. So these will be available to you later, maybe a little easier to read close up. So in the area of energy efficiency, 3 bills to highlight. The first one, property assessed clean energy financing for commercial and industrial properties. Governor Ritter mentioned this. 4 years ago, the legislature passed a PACE bill for residential, but because of FHA and other reasons, nothing really moved. We are very optimistic that PACE for commercial and industrial is really going to take off. There's a full breakout session on tomorrow morning talking about PACE implementation. And one difference in Texas compared to other states on PACE, Connecticut, for example, has a top-down state administered PACE program. And so because of that, you have uniformity in how you participate, terms and conditions of financing, measurement, verification of savings, and it's all very controlled. In Texas, we are a local control state, and so the legislation here enables local governments to establish local PACE programs. So there can be different terms within the boundaries of the law depending on which jurisdiction you're in. So to provide support to local governments that are moving forward with this and to hopefully provide a more uniform program statewide for, say, a commercial property owner that has, malls or strip centers in San Antonio and Houston and Dallas and wherever. There's work underway that we're calling PACE in a Box, and that is a sort of a turnkey set of policies, program designs, technical standards that local governments can use so they're not starting from scratch and they don't have to reinvent the wheel. That work has been going on for several months now and will wrap up January, February, and those tools will begin rolling out to local governments. So this one, very optimistic about what may happen here. And the basic idea, and Governor Ritter mentioned this, is you're better aligning the financing term of an energy efficiency, renewable energy, or water system improvement, or can be distributed generation as well, with the benefits that project creates. And so you've got if it's a 10-year or a 15-year ROI, you now have the cost recovery or the financing for that project extended over that term. So those benefits are in alignment with the costs. The second bill here, Senate Bill 700, is designed to harmonize what are right now a scattered set of standards that apply to state agencies. State agencies, starting 10 years ago, had to develop energy efficiency and energy master plans, and then 5 years later, they had to respond to a governor's executive order on fuel cost reductions, and then later, another 4 or 5 years later, there's another directive, and so this has caused a lot of confusion, and you have kind of competing issues here, but all kind of sort of, in theory, driving toward the same end game. Senate Bill 700 is designed to harmonize and align those efforts so that agencies are less burdened with separate reporting requirements, and all of this can move in a more positive direction. Energy savings performance contracts, Senate Bill 533. Every session the last few years, there has been a tweak to the energy savings performance contracting enabling statutes. This one applies to public higher education institutions and agencies. And the concern was that because of turnover in an agency or higher ed that may have an energy manager today, but someone different 2 years from now, you don't have the continued resident expertise with these entities to review the performance of these projects. And so our office, SECO, was tasked with reviewing the savings reports from state agency projects and then providing that review back to the agency as well as to the Legislative Budget Board. And then the Higher Ed Coordinating Board has a similar function for public higher ed. A couple of bills on combined heating and power. The first one, if a CHP facility in competitive areas of the state is providing thermal energy or has a thermal host, they can also, within certain conditions, sell electricity from that CHP facility to the purchaser of the thermal output if they're using, I believe it's the same or infrastructure that doesn't go beyond the line. So this allows more benefits to be realized from a single CHP facility. And then on the CHP evaluation, again, a couple of years ago, buildings that were defined as critical government facilities, and these are public facilities that could be used as places of shelter in the event of natural disasters, we're required to consider CHP at the time of major renovation or new construction. But there are no guidelines as to how CHP was to be evaluated in these facilities. And so some evaluations happened and some didn't, and some were sort of checkbox efforts. So House Bill 1864 requires our office to publish guidelines on how CHP should be evaluated. Those are done, they're on our website, and that should provide more uniformity in how these potential projects are assessed. TURP, the Texas Emission Reduction Program, there was a lot of changes, additions, adjustments to many of the grant programs under TURP. Senate Bill 1727 continues TURP through 2019, carves out $1 million in 2014 and 2015 for new technology that can include electric storage, which may be interesting to folks in this room. There are also additions. A lot of this is on the mobile side, so incentives for if you've been in the Port of Houston, you have these older trucks that kind of move containers from the port facility to warehouses called drayage trucks, and they're usually the trucks that should have been off the road 15 years ago. So there's now an incentive program to accelerate the retirement of those older trucks and improve the overall emissions from those fleets. And then a variety of other things. The challenge that still remains with TURP is that the revenue that is realized from the fees associated with TURP far exceeds the amount of dollars that are appropriated for TURP programs. And so the result is, in the state treasury, there remains this balance of funds that have not been used for the original intended purpose. Last session, there's a very deliberate effort by leadership in the legislature to cure this problem, not just for TURP, but for other funds that had been collected but then not used for the original intended purpose. There's a sporting goods fee that we all pay when we buy sporting goods. If you may not realize that, that's supposed to go to state parks. Well, most of it doesn't. It sits there to balance the budget. It can't be used for other things. So over the next several years, likely what will happen is there will be a ramped up allocation of funding to TURP programs to better align the expenditures with the revenues. In renewable energy, a couple of things. House Bill 2500, this is an accelerated depreciation for renewable energy projects. Chapter 313 modifications. Chapter 313 allows developers of, originally this was designed toward manufacturing facilities that have a high property tax burden. And the idea was, how do you create an incentive for manufacturers to build facilities in the state that spin off jobs and local economic development benefits. And so this was a sort of a deferred property tax incentive approach, but it also applied to wind projects, and we've probably seen more wind farms take advantage of the 313 provisions than any other type of facility. So a local school district can grant an exemption for a period of time so that the wind project does not realize that full burden of property tax costs on it until essentially 10 years down the line. So it's a local option thing. Well, part of this bill extended that, but then also required the Comptroller's office to do a report looking at job creation associated with all of these projects. So a little more transparency and visibility into how a lot of these projects operate. Underwater, probably the big natural resource issue that was undertaken was the state water plan and funding it. House Bill 4 did a couple of things, overhauled the state water development board and its commissioner structure from appointed to, or from a broad board to appointed commissioners, not unlike the TCEQ. Authorize the issue of revenue bonds to fund the state water program. And then the companion piece to that was Senate Joint Resolution 1, which created basically a referendum for the voters to determine if they wanted to use $2 billion out of the rainy day fund, which is very healthy these days because of increase in oil and gas severance taxes that go into that fund. And the voters did authorize the use of $2 billion as seed funding to get the state water plan moving. 20% of that's for conservation and reuse. And so now we'll see that begin to play out in public infrastructure projects. Also underwater, Senate Bill 198, a provision to protect and allow homeowners that wanted to use water conserving turf grass, zero scrape, other things that might be inconsistent with homeowners association rules, allowed them some protection and a more deliberate process so that those options would not be boxed out by homeowners associations. Tax issues, just one here I wanted to highlight. There is a property tax exemption for certain pollution control property. This applies to things like scrubbers, usually on large industrial facilities, where the addition of that is going to increase the value of that facility. Now you can apply for, and you can get an exemption on that type of property once it's been reviewed through the TCEQ, and then that flows down to your local appraisal district. And that's to encourage more, these are high-cost pieces of equipment or systems, and to encourage more industrial plants to make those types of investments. Under regulatory, the PUC underwent sunset. They were reauthorized. There were changes to the way that the commissioner qualifications are set up. And then also water and sewer utility regulatory issues, which were at the TCEQ, were consolidated and moved to the PUC. So the Systems Benefit Fund, which spun out of electric restructuring in 1999, the surcharge is eliminated effective September 1st of 2013, and the balance of the fund has to be used by 2016. This is another of these issues where a fee structure was set up, funds were accumulated but not appropriated and used for the original intended purpose, and so this like the TURP fund and some of these others, addresses that issue. Then also House Bill 1600 addresses limitation on data sharing from smart meters. There bubbles up from time to time a lot of pushback from certain consumers and consumer groups about access to data and smart meters and whether they're accurate, everything about it. And so this was sort of another piece of legislation designed to help address some of those consumer concerns. So that's a quick run through. I'll stop there. Tom, we're going to take questions if we have time at the end, or how do you want to do that?
We're probably going to run out of time.
Okay, all right.
Are there any quick questions?
I will be around all day today and all day tomorrow, so if you have any questions on any of this, just track me down and be happy to visit. Thanks.